Hello and welcome to Culture Conversations. I'm Craig Foreman, your guide through the ever-evolving world of organizational culture. Here we engage in real, unscripted conversations with the changemakers actively shaping our workplaces. From innovative strategies to heartfelt insights, each conversation is a step towards making work better for us all. Thank you for joining us and welcome to Culture Conversations. Welcome to Culture Conversations. My guest today is Tara Turk-Haynes, who has had a really incredible professional journey, and it's been marked by a series of progressive roles in various organizations. Most recently, she was the VP of DE&I, also in talent management at Leaf Group. But prior to that, she worked in talent acquisition and employee engagement at MetaCloud as the Director of Administration and Operations. She also held editorial roles at Variety Magazine and studied playwriting in school. So a studied playwright as well. It's a fascinating career journey that proves as a reminder it's not always a straight line, that things can take unexpected turns and all those unrelated things can play out in interesting ways. Personally, I first met Tara at a Work Human conference probably 5 or 6 years ago. And as I remember it, I was having a conversation with some people there, and she had overheard the conversation and walked up and we started talking. She was super engaged about employee engagement and data and what I was talking about. And then we started working together on that. We brought in Culture Amp. We started leveraging ways to collect and understand data, and which led to including her, involved in our content and getting her on panels. And I will say that I always walked away fascinated by her story, especially in a world where it seems like so many climb a prescribed path. I always felt a sense of camaraderie with her as someone whose passions had dovetailed with her career and somebody whose journey was unique and not prescribed. And I saw that in myself. So today in our conversation, a couple of the key topics we talked about are navigating dynamic career transitions, so identifying those hidden talents in employees and ourselves, and the power of mentorship to help shape careers. The interplay between personal interest and professional skills. How do we really look at those things that bring us a lot of joy and plug those into our professional life? And finally, navigating workplace culture in challenging times, which is as important now as ever. So to be with her once again, to have the opportunity to sit down and dig in is something I'll never pass on. I'm so excited to share her brilliance with more people that may be getting introduced to her for the first time, and it's such a treat. So with that, Tara, welcome to Culture Conversations. How are you?
I'm good. I'm recovering from travel, but I'm good.
Where have your travels taken you?
So if I say it out loud, it doesn't really feel like a whirlwind situation, but the body, as you get older, the body is like, that's a whirlwind. So I went LA to New York. New York was 72 hours, then last flight from New York to San Fran, landing at midnight, then getting on the stage for Culture Amp at 7 a.m. the next morning. Yeah. There all day, then my flight back home. I think the last flight back to LA. So the body is a little.
Yeah, and important to see, you were conferencing number one, and when you got to San Francisco, you were co-emceeing. So It wasn't just. It was.
Yeah.
There was a lot of.
Yes.
Focus.
There was activity galore for sure, but it was great seeing you.
Oh, it was good to see you. It's always good to see you.
Thanks.
And so real quick, because on this whole podcast is about conversation, so we're not going to spend forever on the background, but I do think it's important if somebody's listening and doesn't know you, how would you quickly describe you, your work, what you're about, for anybody listening, just to help set the stage?
Yes. So I've been in talent and engagement for over 15 years. The last 4 or 5 have been in DE&I as well. And, got into talent accidentally. I was an admin for an executive, and then had a mentor who was like, I think you'd be really good at talent acquisition. And they were correct. I really liked it. And I'm always about representation of people, and kind of those all things came together. And I've been just agile in the course of my learning and hopefully impact on other people ever since. So that is me.
You've had impact. Well, you said something interesting here. So here we go.
Yes.
I think it's really important. Just, a lot of people, particularly in the space that we're in, how to get into it, how to move into it, share that you were an EA. Like, what an interesting journey, and then moved into it. What I guess there's two sides to the question. One is just personally,
Yeah.
but I think I want to hit a little bit too, if anybody, because I love these interesting career journeys and paths.
Yeah.
Like you say to other people, like I just love that there was that moment where somebody spotted something in you.
Hmm.
Just talking about different types of career paths and getting into this work.
I am a huge advocate for that. So my trade really is playwriting. I went to grad school for that. I still am a playwright. I just finished a commission and was in a writer's room. So I never stopped doing that. But in grad school, one of my beloved professors was a professional playwright, Edward Allen Baker, early on said, "You are not going to be rich being a playwright." He's like, "Just so you know, you can have a play on Broadway, you're still gonna have 3 jobs." Like he just like said it straight. So like that dream of starving artist was never my bag anyway, and I had to feed myself. And so administrative work, because of the type of personality I am, was just like how I did that for years. And my mentor, Beverly Carmichael, who was the former chief people officer at Southwest and Ticketmaster, she was my boss at Ticketmaster. And she was just like, because I was there when they hired her, and she was like, "I've watched you. I feel like you've got a hidden talent in there, and I just want to see if you're interested." And so it definitely takes someone to see something in you, which I think is super valuable. And I try to do that in my own leadership of just, the world kind of, when you get out of school, and I'm not even saying college because a lot of people don't go to college, but just in general, it's like a liberal arts world where you're like, I don't know what I want to do when I grow up. I'm not sure. But it's helpful to have somebody who's going to present ideas to you and see if you like it, and we try it. And I think that's definitely set me on a path of where I am now.
If I was talking to Beverly and I asked her what it was that she saw in you,
Yeah.
what do you think she'd say?
I engage with people really easily. Like I just was never the kind of assistant who um changed depending on who I talked to. In fact, some of the executives I'd worked for, um, they solicited my opinion. Like, how did this person treat you when you were talking to them, when you were scheduling this meeting? Or, they're very much about like, who's treating people at all levels of this organization, how. And so I was very, forthcoming. But I'm also like, I love talking to people, even though I'm an extrovert introvert. So either way it goes, I think that she really saw that that was helpful. And I also had a good assessment of people, very interested in people.
Well, that's great, right? That
Yeah.
you think the core piece there, and for anybody listening, I think you were displaying, even maybe not even intentionally all the time, your interest in people, your ability to read
Yep.
people, you're asking you
Hmm.
to people. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where, and I think these are the kinds of things that can come through in different roles. This is not role specific.
Right.
You might be doing another job right now, but go, that's what I love. And how do you amplify that? How do you have, others see that?
Yes. Yeah. Cause I take that for granted. Like, especially probably early in my career, I just thought everybody was like that. And it's not true. And we all have very different, unique talents. There are some people who just, that's not their talent. They have other ones. And I think that's valuable too. But I think she's the kind of person who always seeks to find people's hidden talents and amplify them. She's demonstrated that even to this day, because I still talk to her even in her fake retirement of being on a million different boards. Like,
I
like
feel like
she,
I met her. I'm not sure if that's the one I met at a conference, but I know she left. She was there for 20 something years. Did she start as like a ticketing agent and moved all the way up? Was that the
oh
person?
no, she was only there for a few years because she was at Southwest before that.
Oh, it was Southwest. I knew a woman at Southwest that had running culture for many, many years.
Yeah, she was the CPO with the early, like, Herb Kelleher. She brought Herb Kelleher to the Ticketmaster office, which was such a great treat, because that old school sort of Southwest culture, reputation was something. I think even back then people were like, how did you do this? And she wrote the foreword to one of the books on Southwest, and I read it and I was like fascinated. Like, talk about like startup before there was a startup. It was just so fascinating. So the culture of necessity of being kind, like you had to in that like market, I think.
You hit on something I think really important. I want to call out that I've found myself, and I think it's really important again to highlight is that be careful not to undervalue the things that you do really well. I think we all think we do it really well, therefore it's just easy. And there, if it's easy, then
Yeah.
it's worthwhile. And I think oftentimes I have this conversation and even reflection for myself sometimes to
Yeah.
remember that our greatest gifts feel easy to us and be looking for that, and they're valuable. And
Yeah.
don't downplay that. And we need others' reflection, but I think sometimes people minimize their best gifts and don't see the value and don't lean into the value in this world that we're living in and leverage that.
I 100% agree with you, but I also think we live in our own mind a lot. So we just think, like, for me, I have a personal high bar. And so I'm just like, if I didn't hit the bar in my mind, then I'm still working on that gift rather than it just like being there and just developing as I grow as a person, rather than just seeing like an overall goal and just being like, oh, I could have done that presentation better. Oh, I could have talked to that person in a different way, like, but you did it, like, and you did it in a way that not everybody can do it, which is so valuable. So you're right. I think we need to kind of take a little inventory sometimes and be like, hey.
And like as a kid, I played guitar my whole life, and I noticed that there was a moment where I had to stop. I always, no matter how well I played, of course, as a
Yeah.
player, I was always comparing myself to the greats, and still,
Yeah.
and almost missing how far I'd come because I'm chasing not even chasing, but just being influenced by, and stopping to realize you're probably better than 95% of people that play guitar, but you're
Right.
still fixated on Eddie Van Halen, like of course, like, and I still love that, but don't
Yeah.
it's like sight of that's that own critic of like, well, I'm not that good, versus
No, 100%. Cause like, first of all, I didn't know you played guitar. So that's amazing. But like, I think for me, there was a moment early in my career when I lived in New York and I was like second EA to a very, well, at the time, infamous executive. And, back in the day when you were an admin, you were rolling calls. So you had to like listen to the conversation and take notes for that executive. And I think he was the kind of person that was so oblivious to like other people completely, like kind of little selfish, arrogant way. And I used to, again, being engaging, I told the person he was talking to when I was putting the call through, we had casual conversation and I was just like there, oh, where'd you go to school? And what'd you study? And I was like, oh, playwriting. And this person mentioned it to my boss and was just like, oh, your assistant, is like a playwright. That's kind of cool. And he just kind of like brushed it off and was just like, I guess, I mean, whatever. And I was like, oh, maybe is that something I should not be talking about at work, right? Like, or maybe he had like, I'm not on this trajectory of fame because he had a lot of like famous friends. And I was like, oh, in his mind, I am not on that trajectory. And two, should I not talk about myself at work because it obviously is something that this person doesn't value? So for many years, I never told people that I was also a playwright because of that reason. And I was like, only recently have I been like, hey, with the DE&I work that I do and sharing vulnerabilities and invisible, capabilities, that I start talking about it because it gives me dimension. But early on, that was squashed for sure.
you
Like
got a
squashed.
story from somebody that wasn't valuable and you hid it away and stopped sharing that part of yourself.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting, like to look back for all of us to unplug and pack, sometimes be critical of where do we get our messages. That was one human, probably an arrogant, narcissistic human.
1000%.
That one, you probably heard a lot of people love that I think it's incredible, but if it hits that insecurity
That
button.
one person, and I was like, oh, it just gave me shivers. And I was like, oh,
While we're there, because this is the last question about your career. When I was listening, I thought it was really interesting, and I love this too. Also, I think some people think, the story. I'm starting over. I'm changing careers. I'm always like, but you're
yeah,
not, like, so
no.
I'm curious to ask you. Now you've come far enough in your career to look back. I'm sure at one point you're like, what am I doing? Playwright. Now I'm doing this. Now I'm doing that. What do you think you got from studying and being a playwright that's with you today? And like, I think that's really neat to look at your past experiences that might not at the time have seemed connected, but now that you're far enough, you can look back. What do you think the value of studying that, learning that, and being a playwright is in your work today?
So it's so funny you say that, because I've been thinking about that for the past few years. So grad school for me, I went to Sarah Lawrence for grad school in theater. The way that they ran their program was that you had to do, it was like a theater company. So you couldn't just go in there and say, I'm a playwright, I'm just going to take playwriting courses. I had to produce, I had to direct, I had to act, and I had to do costume and, all of these different things. And I feel like that made me a more complex person now. My first play, and this is it's kind of a moving story, and I'll try to keep it as short as possible, but my first play that I did was a very good friend of mine who just recently passed away. She was an actress, and it was her first play that she wrote for our program, and it was not a light subject matter. We're talking domestic violence and whatever, and I had to play this person, and in order to graduate, we had a production weekend. I had to play this woman who was visiting her mom, who was in jail for killing the spouse for domestic violence. And I too was experiencing the same thing. And my father, who has since passed, had never seen me do like any of this. And like, he was like, I can't come to your graduation, but I'm going to come to see these weekend of plays that you're in. And I was like, okay, Dad, and he saw me, and he was like so visibly moved. I mean, this is like a man who worked at Ford for like 40 years, never really kind of artistic at all. And he was just like, how did you do that? And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, how did you like make that moment real for people? Like, how did you, he just kept asking me so many questions. He was so impressed. He was like, I've never seen you in that way.
Fathom how that could
How
happen.
did that even? And so that connection to people, right? And even my own dad, who loved me beyond words, but still clearly made an impact. I was never going to be an actress. However, understanding what theater does for people in the real world, which is connection, community, impact, making people be in a moment, is something I think that has helped me in my career completely. I can see different sides of people. I can see everyone's motivation. I can see a story developing, and I never waver from that. And it's given me the confidence to be able to speak to people, because it's not about me, it's about our moment. You know what I mean?
Oh, I love that question. I mean, that really just came to me. I mean, I thought about it along the way, but I
Yeah.
love the answer and that question. And I think it's so important too, to like, especially for younger, maybe somebody younger in their career, they're like wondering what it's worth or what's going on. And just please, everything is giving you something, and it all sort of comes together and makes sense. And I have an interesting one. I'll share one that
Yeah.
we'll stay on the music theme. So I did not want anybody when I started playing guitar. I did not want anybody to force me. I wanted it to be my thing. I didn't want to be
Yeah.
forced. Didn't really take many lessons. I never learned to read music. Um, but I over the years it was just my thing, and I learned to play by ear, and then starting to play with others, and kind of like the struggles through improvisation, just
Mhm.
learning something by ear. And I remember back then, like in moments playing with people in the early days, because I didn't read, so I just had to kind of follow along, like how awkward and how difficult that was. But I think, and what I realized is improvisation is kind of a muscle, like trusting yourself in the moment to just let go. And now I do that more easily, when I perform, or if I'm on a stage, and you've seen me. But I think back to, I never would have connected the dots, but I think I worked the muscle out through the guitar. So when I go
Yeah.
into meetings sometimes with executives, or I can just let go. I can just say, I've done my
Yes.
preparation. I'm going to sit in that
Yep.
room and just be, and trust my instinct and intuition. And I think that's something I might take for granted sometimes, but I think back to all those years when it was uncomfortable, and realizing a lot of people have never worked that muscle out, and it is a muscle. And
Yes.
something I didn't think I'd get because of playing the guitar, and now I see it all over the place.
It's your talent as a human, right? And then when you do practice, I think it comes out in different ways. And it's so interesting. We think about moments where we just trust that what we are experiencing is going to be a benefit in the long run, no matter what, like everything, like you said, everything contributes along the way. You're just picking up little different skill sets along the way. put them in your little basket until you need them. That's what actors do, like
Of
all the
course.
time.
Just yeah, be with it. And if you're younger in the journey, just trust that you're collecting the pieces that are eventually going to come together. If you let it be, don't.
Exactly.
Before we
Yeah.
move on, are you into musical theater, or is it kind of more
Yeah, I'm not I like some musical theater, but I'm more drama. We just, you know, yeah, I still see a lot and
favorite I
yeah.
love theater. I was going to ask you what your favorite musical theater play is.
I like the like really sort of like grimier ones like Cabaret and Hamilton. I'm not a, sort of light and airy musical person, and they're fun. I mean, when I was a kid, the first one I ever saw, I think, was uh Stormy Weather and American in Paris. Like, I thought that that's, the I used to watch old movies with my mom all the time. And so I was like, those are great. And then you see like some of them and you're like, oh, not all of them are
Les
great.
Mis, you Les Mis fan?
Not really. And that's only because in high school we had to read it in French, and it was the bane of my existence because I was not a very good French student in high school. Like, it was very conjugations, and I was like, I just am taken out of this story because I just don't know what I'm doing here.
For
Yeah,
me, if I say Les Mis, I like a couple, but Kinky Boots. I don't know if that falls into light and airy. I think
it's
Kinky
a
Boots
mixture. It's definitely a mixture. I've seen it a couple times. I think it's a fun one, but yeah, I like the adult
the
grimy
themes
kind of
are there,
ones.
but it's packaged kind of light, but it has some really some no deeper themes.
100%. 100%. And like, oh, also my friend Dominique's Temptations, Ain't Too Proud. Like, love that because I think it sneaks up on you, you know.
Nice. I had asked just before we got started, but I'll ask again. I said just it's kind of interesting. I said what's up for you right now? What's going on? What's on your mind? So
Yeah.
I asked again with what's on your mind right now? What's going on just professionally or the world and how it's all connecting and what are you thinking about?
Um, I was just having this conversation with some friends who are not sort of in our space, but just, in the world, and other things are happening in the world and like how that translates to conversations in the workplace. Obviously thinking about I've always thought about this, but there are moments in the world in the past few years that kind of keep hitting this conversation for me. And it's just like, George Floyd, and like, how do we talk about this in a way that addresses that we are not uniform in our educational sort of knowledge, because we don't have like uniform education in the US or globally for that matter. It's not like you can like, yes, this requirement of learning about this is met. What I feel like I've learned in Detroit as a young Black girl is kind of different than what other people have learned. And so this keeps coming up because I do feel like we have to talk about it, because there are people impacted in our organization as the world gets like more technologically advanced and digital age and virtual, and like we've got people all over the world. How are we having these conversations so those people feel seen when there's something that happens that affects them? And like, how are you as a leader sitting with processing, but also holding space for the people around you? Um, People are very sensitive, because like when you hear like you haven't said anything, like the biggest thing I get as a DEI person is like, my company never said anything about, and you can fill in the blank at this point because there's so many world things that have happened. How do we meet that demand thoughtfully and mindfully, um, and gently, so people feel seen, but also not rushing to solving the problem? Like, it's not necessarily about like, I have the answer for what's happening in this world, but how do we let them know we're thinking about it as leaders? Because it affects productivity, it affects what people do. Like, if I'm really upset about something that's happened to my community, obviously I'm not going to do great in a meeting. Sometimes I'm going to be wanting to check my phone. I want to, this presentation may not go well. This conversation, I might be distracted on something else. And
Yeah.
so,
Myself into, I found myself doing that this week. I'd drift into the news
yeah,
and the whole state of being would change. And
yeah. Your
And
body physically
every time this
changes.
happens, so just we're talking
Yeah.
right now on the heels of Israel and Gaza, but every time this
Yeah.
happens, I also think there's this interesting thing of we can see it in such a big scale, but the truth is this is happening all the time. I mean, if somebody in your family dies, it's just as intense as some of the, other things. So I think we talk about it when it's large scale, but the reality is at individual levels, this is happening all the time for people.
Yeah. I think that really kind of solidified for me a few years ago, and I think it's the same conference you and I actually met at, which is that one of those conferences in San Fran, where Michelle Mijung Kim
Isn't
did
it?
one of the keynotes, and I think you were there. But she was talking about how people can't compartmentalize themselves at work. So if you read a headline, there is a solid chance that it's happening to someone in your organization, and they have been changed. And so for us to go on as business as usual is really challenging and asking a lot of our people. So how do we hold that space for them, right? How do we allow them to know we're thinking of them? Like, this is a space that you can feel like you can be candid and say, today's just like not happening for me because I am checking my phone. I want to see if loved ones or I'm, however, it doesn't even have to be a direct connection. It could just be your community and like people that you love associated with that community, right? It's not always even about visibly. Like, I don't have a connection to Gaza directly. If you look at me, you wouldn't assume that, but I have really good friends who from Palestine and really good friends who are like from Israel. Like, I just, and I love them and I'm hurting for them.
Mhm.
So it's I think people make judgments based off of like, oh, if it's just something that happened in the Black community, that's the only reason why I would be affected, but that's not necessarily true.
Whole idea of intersectionality. I mean, look, I'm having so many times we have these conversations, and in some ways I am empathetic and outsider talking about it. And I
Yeah.
know I'm Jewish, and as a Jewish American, you're raised, my grandparents are Holocaust survivors. There's a lot in Israel. There's a lot in all of it. And there always has been. And it's a very, even myself grappling with what does that mean over the years and what about the policies and all that. And also through my journey and trying to be more open-minded, like very aware of these scenarios when there are attacks, on the Asian community or
Yes.
just and staying aware of that's happening for people and how do I show up. But I say in this one, it's the difference between like cognitively understanding and experiencing. I will say that this week there's been moments of like I'm feeling in an alternate reality, like when you're in a space when it's so heavy and it's so big and no one's like saying anything and you're like just
Yeah.
kind of out of your body a little bit, or so just I'm just reflecting as I'm going through this myself of like what's the experience like when it's me, when it's something that's impacting me so much,
Yeah.
where you assume everybody knows, they're watching the news, they might not know something happened at my house, in my home,
Right.
and that this and like and maybe asking you because you've done this work, like what is the answer to your point? Like it's not that we need to rush in and like get into savior mode.
No.
Yeah, so I'm in the middle of it right now, still even processing that.
Well, I think that the reality of understanding that we are all real-time processing, right? Um, I'm hope I'm cautiously optimistic because I feel like since George Floyd, which is a pivotal moment because I think it taught people a lot of different things, which is that we can still real and Tamir Rice and all, I can go on the list, but like, Sandra Bland, we are in the moment processing that we are not all having the same experience in this world, that there are groups of people who experience this all the time and they've had to feel like they are covering in order to get their jobs done. And now we're understanding what covering is because so many different communities have had things happen that we are now bringing to the surface. They're not new things because we've been in, things happen to people since the beginning of time. But I feel like now, with the speed of which the news reaches us, social media and all of these, it's reaching us so much quicker and things are happening so much faster. We're
And
not getting time to process,
yeah.
But we still need to process, which I think leads to a lot of the burnout conversations that we're having for people. And, the weight of, the workplace shifting. But I think hopefully it's a moment where we all, different communities, sit back as we, embrace each other and say, I empathize with. I saw someone last night at an event who is a member of the Jewish community, and I was like, we're at an event and it's loud, and I was like, how are you doing? And she's like, oh, I'm fine. I'm like, no. Like, how are you doing? And do you need anything? Like, that's when, like, it's a loud event, people are around, but we have created a moment for each other. Cause I said, I just want you to know that I can feel and empathize what you must be feeling. Cause I have kind of been there in a different way. But how do we let people know on a larger scale that?
It's come up for me early in my career and my own journey working with, organizations and engagement. I worked at a company called Achievers, and we did recognition and rewards software. And there was something like, if there was I typically take a big theme from some of my job experiences. And there was one that I took there through the lens of recognition and rewards. That is, I have laid it over all my work since, and it still holds. And it is this fundamental. It's like, fundamentally, people want to be seen and heard.
Yes.
There's a deep, because I think we are safe if we're seen and heard. If we are not safe as humans, right? We're connected.
Yes.
And I think what I'm hearing, and I think, there's all, the different pieces of advice on when to be quiet or when not. I think what you just shared, what it evoked for me, is I don't think I need much from anybody, or I need to take responsibility to ask to get my needs met. I think what you just shared, what hit me was it's just like knowing that someone, like, oh, you see me, that I'm going, like, I don't need much more.
Yeah.
I need you to solve anything. I think that's like when you shared that conversation, if you would have come up to me, we could have said that and gone about the evening. And I was just like, oh, I just feel seen. Like, this is happening for me. And someone just took a moment to recognize that without trying to solve it. So maybe that's the theme. I was thinking as you were talking, like, what would for leaders? And maybe there's maybe not one answer other than just in what way. It could be, maybe it is through Slack. Maybe it's so much engineers that, like, I don't know what's the best way to help people in your world be seen and heard without having.
I don't know is very powerful. We always say this for leaders. I don't know is a great sentence because it makes people feel like you're human and they believe in you more. But I think being the person who sees the person is important in creating that space. But also, if you are receiving that, how do we break the cycle of us going, oh, I'm fine? Because that's our immediate response when someone says, how are you doing? I'm good. I'm fine. I'm great. But if you're not, it's okay to kind of just.
I think you just exemplified. I mean, that's a great skill for a leader. If you really intuitively sense that, that's how people are going to naturally answer. Just to say, I just want to ask you again, just checking in. Like, I'm looking at you. How are you okay?
Yep.
Because at that point, it's like, hey, I'm fine. And then, okay, I'll back off. Or like, thank you. Like, now I see that you're really going the extra step just to see me. So
we're not doing just like polite banter. I'm really just asking you how you are actually doing.
And then if they say they're okay, back off.
Yeah.
Don't keep going after that.
No, just I see you. I'm here. If you need anything, there's a lot happening.
I think for a lot of leaders, it's just, I think one of the things that keeps people from doing this, particularly leaders, is the fear that they're not going to know what to do or how to solve it. So that's where the silence comes from.
Yep.
And just say, it's okay. The objective here is
not solving it.
Frame the objective is my objective here is to see that human. I clearly don't have the answers to solve trauma that could be tied to
No one is asking you to be a global diplomat, a policy change maker, politician, solver of all problems. I think that's the trap that a lot of us get into.
And I think that's where we stay silent, where the pain comes from. We're scared.
A leader solves things. No, a leader just solves for business things. But the human part of it, right, is not solving, but rather seeing authentically that human being that is on your team or in your company. And just even if they want to say 4 words or 0 words, they know they can, right? And that's a safe space.
And just how do we level up our leaders more? Because it's like these are the kinds of things that can be taught. And I think when you just advance people through the ranks and say, now you're a leader, like sometimes you're missing the point. Yeah. I love this conversation. I see we're running on time. I think the last thing I wanted to talk to, because we were both at the Culture Amp Leaders Forum what was it last week? Was it a week ago?
I don't know what days are anymore. I don't know. We're just in time.
Just there together, and I wanted to ask you what did you just kind of have our final part of our conversation around what did you what were some of the highlights or what were some of the ahas or takeaways, from that time together and what you heard or what was going on there?
It was really great to hear authentically from some really impactful HR leaders on the practicality of navigating culture within the organization. Because I do feel like we're talking about really nuanced things in the last few years when we talk about like the revolution of work and culture and DEI and these things that we still don't share definitions of in each, company or even department. That can be different definitions, but the practicality of creating that space was really interesting. How do you work with other leaders, right, to get what you need in order to make sure that this environment is what it needs to be? What's important as being an HR leader now, as opposed to, it's not just like policies and all of these different things. There's like a human element, and it's so valuable to have HR leaders, I think, talk about that more, because I think hopefully we're changing the face of what people think HR really is. And that's from like the people in the organization as well as like leaders. It's human-centric. We're moving towards like the human, like, ability to create space for humans in the workplace, like, and doing that in the best way possible. So I really loved seeing that those kind of conversations happen, how people are doing it differently. You're having like, fractional, or you're having part-time, co-leads because of children and burnout, and like being super vulnerable about like, this may not look the same for everybody. It's like relationships. Like what works for you in your relationship may not work for anybody else, but I'm sharing what works for us because this is what, this is what we do. And I think that's really important and valuable.
Yeah, I agree
Yeah.
with that. I think a big takeaway, there was a moment, I mean, I have a few takeaways, some are more practical, but the question was asked how many people, so it was primarily senior HR leaders, probably representing 60, 70 companies in the room. And
Yeah.
so how many people have experienced a reduction in force in the
Yeah.
last year? And almost every hand went up. And it's like, it, but when you see it like that, you're like, and it was a reminder, like the conversation has shifted very quickly.
Yes.
And there's still like a hangover of, and I didn't think about, like, but the middle of COVID, businesses were doing really well. And it was
Mhm.
a strange, like, we're in COVID, but businesses are doing well. And then this happened. And just, I think there's a shift in the tone right now around, we have to get a little more serious about this from a human perspective, but it's not all light and fluffy. It's heavy right now. How are we building organizations around humans, but also around performance? Because we have to, I mean, people are doing less with more with less, and I think this
Uh,
adage of better, not bigger, which is pushing people to like, it's not as easy as it used to be. It used to be a little bit easier to throw money at problems. Now you can't. Now you have to get more creative, and now you have to be more thoughtful.
mhm. And I hope what happens is, like, I think the past few years have taught me, one of the things it taught me is like, executives are humans too, and like what they hypothesize or guesstimate what's going to happen within a business is not always like going to happen. Like they're making like human kind of predictions as well. Sometimes those things they have a domino effect, right? Like I think taking in your leaders that work with you, if you're a CEO, and saying, okay, HR, how does your department come in and impact this decision, right, that I'm making as leader of this organization? Just it's, allowing more voices to impact decisions when we talk about organizational design and all of these different things. Hopefully that's become more aware, because you do see a lot of shifting of leaders. One of the surprises for me was that one company that said they've seen like 3 CEOs in the past, like couple years, and that wasn't the only company, right? I was like, oh, oh, there's a leadership shift happening here too. Like, what's going on?
This might sound like a tangent, but it's coming up for me, and I think it kind of hits on what you're talking about. I think a lot often about, and for many years I have, around our organizational designs and how
Yeah.
we can talk about things, but if we have systems and designs in place that don't, like, for instance, I think of like a triangle. Like most of our organizations design as a triangle, and then we say we don't want competition and we want transparency, and it's like, well, that's not really real if you're operating in a triangle, gets skinnier and skinnier towards the top, and that's fine. Like in the military, great. In a hospital, great. Just like reevaluating our structures and our organizations and making sure they're the best, like getting our organizations in shape. I call like circles or triangles.
Yes.
But that's led me to think about something that I think the way we kind of perpetuate these stories. I mean, how many times do you hear it's lonely at the top?
Yeah.
And we just accept that. And now I'm starting to think like, but okay, why don't we break that? That's sad. And when we have systems where there's just one person at the top all by themselves and we think we're going to get somewhere. So just with these things that I think we've thought about and even sold ourselves on, and starting to push back on these ideas, we work in these hierarchies and then say it's lonely at the top. Well, a circle has, if you sit in a circle, there can be a leader of a circle. It's probably a lot less as the leader of a circle than the leader of a triangle.
Yeah. So someone said to me, because I was talking about like DEI and prioritization within the companies, they were like, when there's an economic issue at hand, the CEO is going to focus on that economic issue. This is the concept of spinning plates, right? Like a couple of plates are going to have to break. And I said, maybe the old way, but the new way is you hire someone who's going to grab the plate that's spinning. While you focus on these two here, there's, to your point, a circle of other people who can pick up. So no plate really, or minimal plates have to be dropped.
To have all the plates. Now look what we do. We live into that.
You don't have to be the only one to spin that plate. You just have to be the one who's making sure it's orchestrated. You're a conductor, right? You're not playing all the instruments here.
This is what we need to break. And this is the new, but this is the new, what we're, look, it's, I've always said it's going to happen it's just how comfortably can we move through it? You can see it happening. I have kids in school. Like they are not going to walk easily into the world that we built. So we can either do it intentionally or we can do it disruptively and make it. So let's just be intentional. And also, I think have empathy for the people that came up in a different system. That was the system they succeeded in. How see everybody.
That transition, but that's all about like what your HR and L&D and DE&I and culture people are there for, is to assist with that. That's their area of expertise. Lean into it, so it's not just like one of the administrative pieces of the business.
Tara, we could go for another 30 minutes. And
we could easily, like we could do our own show. Totally fine.
But again, I've designed this podcast to be not like, oh, well, had that guest, can't bring that person back. I would love this to goes on and have be able to pick up conversations again and keep these conversations going. But I guess I'll just wrap with how grateful every time we speak, I'm reminded how grateful I am that you're in my world, and just the way you think and the conversations that we have, and just the world it makes me feel better that people like you are out helping lead the charge in creating better.
I'm so glad we're connected and have been in various different ways throughout these years. And so it's always just a pleasure to talk to you and remind myself of how synchronicity is very important in the world. It really is amazing.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time. And as always, it was great to talk with you. And I'm sure we'll see each other again soon.
We will. I'm excited to see it.